It hits 5 minutes ago with the kind of calm wording that usually hides chaos. The Royal Foundation has confirmed a complete restructure under Catherine. Not an update. Not an adjustment. Complete. That word changes everything, because it implies something was broken enough to rebuild from the inside out. And insiders say the real shock isn't that Catherine led it, it's that the foundation is admitting it publicly. Which means the palace believes the old structure couldn't survive one more week. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The statement itself is almost too neat, and that's the first sign insiders say you should pay attention. When something is truly routine, the palace doesn't need precision. But when something is dangerous, precision becomes protection. Every word is chosen to sound professional, measured, forward-looking, because forward-looking language is how institutions disguise urgency, and the most revealing part is the word complete. That is not the language of mild reform, that is the language of demolition followed by rebuild. It signals that patching was no longer possible. Insiders describe complete restructure as a red flag because it suggests three things at once. The change is urgent, it is sweeping, and it is irreversible. Urgent means something forced it. Sweeping means the problem wasn't isolated. Irreversible means someone has decided the previous structure was not just imperfect, it was unsafe. Unsafe for the mission, unsafe for the reputation, unsafe for the people who are meant to be leading it. And when a foundation connected to the monarchy uses language that strong, it's because the internal reality became too unstable to keep hidden behind polite smiles. That's where Catherine's role becomes central, not as a figurehead but as an operator. Publicly, she is calm always. She is warmth, steadiness, reassurance. Privately, insiders say, she can be strategically decisive in a way the public rarely sees. The kind of decisiveness that only appears when patience runs out. Catherine is known for restraint, which is why a complete restructure under her name lands like a signal. She didn't just adjust the system, she took control of it. And insiders say the tension behind this is not emotional drama, it's friction over power. Budgets, priorities, influence. And the question that always sits underneath charity work when royalty is involved: who controls the mission? Because missions determine narratives, narratives determine legitimacy, and legitimacy determines who is allowed to lead without being questioned. If the foundation's structure was blurred, if approvals were slow, if projects were being managed behind the scenes, then Catherine's credibility could be shaped by people she didn't choose. Insiders claim that is the kind of quiet battle that turns a charity into a battlefield. The emotional beat is sharp because it forces Catherine into a role she never publicly asked for. Fighter. Not in a loud way, in a disciplined way. A woman protecting legacy while being forced to fight the machine that surrounds legacy. Insiders suggest Catherine's core fear isn't criticism, it's losing control of the mission she's tied her reputation to. Because if the foundation is seen as messy, the blame doesn't land on invisible operators. It lands on the public face. And Catherine, insiders say, decided she would not be a public face for a system she couldn't fully steer. That's why this restructure feels less like a new strategy and more like a defensive move, a protective move. The kind that happens when someone realizes the old structure wasn't just inefficient, it was vulnerable. Vulnerable to leaks, vulnerable to internal sabotage disguised as bureaucracy, vulnerable to competing agendas that hide behind process. Catherine's calm, insiders say, is not softness, it's control. And this restructure reads like control being reclaimed. Then comes the detail insiders whisper as the real trigger. One internal review line reportedly set off the entire overhaul overnight. One line. Not a long report. Not a slow build. One sentence that made the leadership realize the truth could no longer be delayed. Insiders won't say what the line was, but they describe it as the kind of finding that changes how you view everything that came before. Suddenly the missed approvals aren't accidents, the delays aren't normal, the confusion isn't harmless. Suddenly it looks like a pattern. And patterns are what Catherine is said to have acted on. Because Catherine doesn't move like someone seeking applause. She moves like someone trying to eliminate risk. If an internal review exposed weaknesses, whether financial, operational, reputational or political, then the palace wouldn't want debate. Debate creates time, and time creates leaks. A complete restructure is what you do when you want to move so fast the problem can't defend itself. The most telling part is that it was confirmed publicly. Insiders say that choice is a shield. When you confirm first, you control the frame. You lock the narrative before someone else can leak it in a way that makes it look like scandal. Public confirmation is not always transparency. Sometimes it's preemption. A message to every internal actor: the decision is done, and the story is set. And once you learn what that internal review reportedly uncovered, the restructure stops looking visionary, it starts looking like containment. The statement sounds professional, even optimistic. But insiders say the most important part is what's missing. No long explanation, no detailed timeline, no soft reassurance. Just confirmation. And when the palace confirms something big without comfort, it means comfort is impossible. Because a complete restructure doesn't happen when everything is healthy, it happens when control is slipping, trust is fractured, and someone decides the only way forward is to tear down what exists before it collapses on its own. Insiders describe this as the palace's favorite trick in a crisis: tidy language with sharp purpose. Containment as care, words that sound responsible, calm and forward-thinking but function like a lid being tightened on a boiling pot. The optimism isn't there to inspire, it's there to prevent panic. Because if the statement admitted stress, it would invite questions the institution does not want asked. What went wrong? Who failed? Who benefited? So instead, the palace offers professionalism. Because professionalism is how you make a rupture look like leadership. And the missing timeline is not an accident. Insiders say a timeline would expose urgency. It would show whether this happened over months like a strategic plan, or over days like a reaction. It would reveal whether Catherine had been building this quietly, or whether something forced her hand suddenly. That's why there's no soft reassurance either. No, this is routine. No, this changes nothing. No, we're grateful to everyone involved. Just confirmation, because reassurance would sound fake when the restructure is too big to pretend is normal. Underneath the clean language, insiders hint at disputed control, messaging, access, approvals, stakeholder relationships, the boring words that hide the real battlefield. Because charities tied to royals aren't run only by goodwill, they're run by governance. And governance is where influence lives. Who signs off? Who gets briefed first? Who decides which initiative becomes the headline, and which dies quietly in a meeting note? Insiders suggest this restructure isn't just about projects, it's about removing the quiet hands that could steer Catherine without her consent. That's where Catherine's emotional contrast becomes the center of the story. Public warmth versus private steel. Catherine can look gentle on camera while making decisions behind closed doors that are surgical. Insiders say that's exactly what makes this restructure so alarming to people who prefer blurred control. Catherine's warmth is not weakness, it's discipline. She smiles so the public feels safe. But when she moves strategically, she does it without apology. And a complete restructure under her name implies she stopped asking for cooperation and started demanding clarity. Foreshadow hangs over everything. This may be about preventing leaks or reputational damage. Insiders argue you don't confirm a complete restructure unless you believe something could come out anyway, because public confirmation is not always transparency. Sometimes it's preemption. If documents exist, if internal conflict is brewing, if stakeholders are unhappy, If someone is threatening to whisper to the press, then the palace confirms first to control the frame. Confirming first allows them to say, "We're leading this," instead of, "We're reacting to it." That's why insiders describe the foundation as a battleground behind the scenes. Not a dramatic battleground of shouting, but a quiet war of friction. Delays dressed as protocol. Approvals slowed down in the name of process. Messages filtered for consistency. Meetings scheduled and then shifted. The kind of internal pressure that never looks like sabotage in public, but feels like sabotage when you are the person trying to execute a mission and everything keeps getting stuck. Insiders imply Catherine was tired of being the face of a system that could be quietly controlled by people who never face the consequences. And then comes the detail that makes insiders lower their voice. They claim one name was quietly removed from decision loops. Not a public resignation. Not a big announcement. A quiet disappearance from the rooms where decisions are made. That's how palaces move, insiders say. Quiet removals instead of loud firings. Less drama, more control. And if a name vanished, it suggests this restructure wasn't just about structure, it was about cutting influence. Because when a name disappears inside a restructure, it usually means a power line has been cut. Insiders say Catherine didn't wake up and decide to restructure for fun. She did it after a breaking point, one moment, that made her realize the foundation could no longer be run on goodwill and polite cooperation. Something happened that felt like sabotage, disguised as bureaucracy. Delays, blocked approvals, blurred accountability. And Catherine, who endured silently for years, reportedly reached the point where silence became a threat to her mission. The trigger, insiders hint, wasn't a loud scandal. It was the slow poison of process. Initiatives that should have moved quickly suddenly got trapped in loops. Funding that had been discussed became complicated. Messaging that Catherine believed was agreed upon was suddenly labelled unapproved. The kind of friction that looks harmless to outsiders, because outsiders assume bureaucracy is normal, but feels like control to the person trying to lead. And when Catherine felt that friction repeatedly, insiders say she stopped viewing it as inefficiency. She started viewing it as a pattern. That's the emotional beat. Catherine realizing her credibility and her causes were being controlled, not attacked directly, managed indirectly. Her public warmth remained, but privately the frustration sharpened into something cleaner than anger: precision. Catherine's mission isn't just about headlines, it's about legacy. And when she sensed that legacy could be redirected by unseen hands, the polite patience she had relied on for years started becoming dangerous. Because patience, in a system like this, can be mistaken for permission. Insiders foreshadow a private meeting that shifted her from patience to enforcement. A meeting where the language stayed polite, but the meaning landed hard. Where Catherine realized that "we'll look into it" was not a promise, it was a method. A method for delaying her until the moment passed. A method for draining urgency out of her priorities, so someone else could decide what mattered. And in that moment, insiders say, Catherine stopped trying to be accommodated. She started preparing to take control. That's where the idea of a gatekeeper figure becomes central. Insiders suggest there was someone shaping what reached her, shaping what stayed off her desk, shaping what sounded possible and what sounded risky. Not a villain in the theatrical sense, more dangerous than that. Calm, efficient, always present. The kind of person who never says no, but always makes yes take so long it becomes meaningless. Catherine allegedly began to suspect she wasn't seeing the full picture. She was seeing the picture that had been curated for her. And if that's true, it explains why the restructure was so dramatic. Because Catherine didn't just fear inefficiency. She feared her legacy being rewritten without her consent. She feared that the foundation attached to her name, her credibility, her future could be used as a platform, while she was quietly prevented from actually steering it. That's the kind of realization that turns a public figure into a private operator. Catherine may smile for cameras, But insiders say she does not tolerate being managed in the shadows. That's why the cliffhanger sentence matters so much. Catherine allegedly said one sentence that changed the room: "We're done negotiating." Not shouted, not dramatic, controlled, final. It's the line you deliver when you've realized the system doesn't respect requests, only authority. It signals she no longer believes goodwill is enough. She is moving from persuasion to structure, from soft cooperation to hard governance. And once Catherine stops negotiating, the question becomes terrifying. Who was benefiting from the old structure staying messy? Insiders claim the Royal Foundation wasn't run by the public faces, it was run by the invisible machinery behind them. The people who control budgets, approvals, and access can steer a charity like a ship without ever touching the wheel in public. And that's why Catherine's restructure matters. It's not about changing projects, it's about changing who has the keys. Because if Catherine didn't take the keys, someone else already had them. This is how control hides. Insiders say inside budgets, calendars, approvals, and communications. The boring parts. The parts nobody claps for. The parts that decide whether a project lives or dies, without anyone ever saying "I killed it." A calendar can block you without blocking you. A budget can weaken you without openly refusing you. A comms approval process can reshape your entire mission while pretending it's for consistency. That's why insiders describe the foundation as a perfect place for invisible power. Because invisible power thrives in process. They suggest a pattern of filtering what Catherine saw versus what she never saw. Which opportunities were brought to her attention? Which risks were emphasized? Which partnerships were framed as not suitable right now? Which meetings were postponed until the moment passed? Over time, insiders say, this creates a reality where the public believes Catherine is leading, but Catherine feels like she's being led, managed inside her own mission. And that emotional beat, being managed while being blamed publicly, can turn even the most patient person into someone who wants proof. Foreshadow deepens with the idea of internal factions aligned with different royal interests. Because a foundation attached to the monarchy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It intersects with influence, donors, reputations, and future narratives. If factions existed, then process wasn't neutral. It was a weapon, a way to protect one narrative while starving another. Insiders hint there may be a paper trail, reviews, logs, notes, and approvals that show exactly how decisions were delayed or redirected. Not flashy evidence, administrative evidence. The kind that's hardest to argue with because it's dated, recorded, and quietly devastating. And that leads to the final cliffhanger insiders whisper about. Catherine secured one piece of proof outside Foundation control. A document. A record. A confirmation that what she felt wasn't imagination, it was structure. And once proof exists outside the system starts panicking. Insiders say the restructure became inevitable the moment William backed Catherine fully, not publicly with speeches but privately with authority. Because the foundation is not just charity, it's influence. And if William aligns with Catherine's overhaul, it signals the future leadership of the monarchy is consolidating power on purpose. That terrifies anyone who benefited from the old blur, because blur is where gatekeepers live. What changed wasn't Catherine's determination, insiders say it was the protection around her. William's support didn't arrive as a headline or a grand statement. It arrived as a shift in gravity. The kind of shift that makes doors open faster, approvals move cleaner, and protocol stop being used as a weapon. Because when William decides Catherine will no longer be managed, the old system loses its favorite leverage. The ability to delay her until the moment passes and then pretend it was never possible. That's the emotional beat insiders emphasize, trust between them hardening into strategy. This isn't romance for cameras, it's partnership under pressure. Catherine has patience, but she also has memory. She knows what it feels like to be the face of a mission, while the machinery behind it quietly edits what she can do. William knows what it means when a system hides behind process. And insiders say the moment he saw Catherine being slowed down, filtered and boxed in, his protective instinct went from private frustration to decisive action. So William empowers Catherine, not by taking her place, by clearing her path. Resetting governance, removing blocks, reordering who signs off, who briefs, who controls timing. The foundation stops operating like a maze and starts operating like a structure. And that's when the people who benefited from confusion feel threatened, because confusion is comfortable to those who control it. Confusion allows deniability. Confusion allows miscommunication. Confusion allows quiet influence without accountability. Insiders foreshadow resistance instantly, not loud resistance, smart resistance. Because in royal life, direct confrontation is risky. Pressure is safer. So the pushback begins in the shadows, polite questions framed as concern, slow approvals framed as due diligence, sudden meetings framed as alignment. The more Catherine tries to bring clarity, the more the old system tries to paint clarity as aggression. They want the story to sound messy, personal, emotional. They want people to believe this is Catherine overreaching, not Catherine reclaiming control. And that's when the whispers start. Insiders claim someone tried to warn William, this will look like a coup. It's a loaded word, meant to frighten him back into hesitation. Because the accusation isn't really about legality, it's about optics. The palace fears anything that looks like the future leadership consolidating power too early. But insiders say the warning also reveals the truth. If people are saying coup, it means they feel power slipping away from them. And when the palace starts whispering coup, you realize this restructure isn't only administrative, it's political. Insiders say the moment the restructure became real, the resistance went silent. No one objects loudly. They object with delays, with sudden concerns, with legal language and reputational warnings. Catherine isn't attacked, she's pressured. Because pressure is safer than confrontation in royal life. And the more Catherine pushes for clarity, the more the old system tries to confuse the story, make it sound messy, make it sound personal, make it sound like she's overreaching. The pattern is familiar. Insiders say containment as care, warnings disguised as protection. We just want to make sure this is appropriate. We have to consider reputational risk. Let's not move too quickly. And yet the timing of those concerns is always suspicious. They arrive when Catherine is close to gaining real control. They arrive when a decision is about to become irreversible. They arrive when someone can no longer quietly steer the mission from behind the curtain. Catherine feels targeted. Insiders claim, but she stays disciplined. She doesn't lash out. She doesn't make it emotional in public. She does the one thing that terrifies quiet gatekeepers. She keeps moving. And when she keeps moving, the resistance shifts to narrative warfare. Foreshadow appears through leaks and briefing attempts, softly planted stories meant to frame Catherine as difficult, intense, uncompromising. Because if they can't stop the restructure, they can at least poison how people interpret it. Meetings multiply. Approvals slow. Conversations become ongoing. The whole machine tries to create fog. But the fog doesn't work the same way once William and Catherine remain aligned. Insiders say that's what breaks the old resistance. Because gatekeepers thrive when they can split people, make one doubt the other, make support feel conditional, make unity feel fragile. A united William and Catherine is not just a couple. It's a block of authority that can't be easily redirected. Then comes the detail insiders describe as the clearest sign communication has become the battleground. An internal email allegedly circulates with one hard instruction: do not let her control comms. That line is pure panic. It admits what everyone inside already knows. Whoever controls communications controls reality. If Catherine controls comms, she controls the narrative of the restructure. She controls the story of the mission, She controls what gets framed as progress and what gets framed as obstruction. And once she controls that, the old system can't hide behind confusion anymore. Because once communication becomes the battlefield, the restructure turns into a war over reality itself. The most surprising move is that they confirmed it openly. Insiders say that wasn't transparency, it was preemption. Because if you announce a restructure first, you control the frame before leaks control it. The palace knows how rumors spread. Staff whispers become headlines in hours. So confirming a complete restructure under Catherine isn't just an update, it's a warning to the system. The decision is done, and the narrative is locked. This is the palace's oldest survival tactic dressed as modern communication. Announce first. Frame first. Because once a story leaks, you don't control what it becomes. A restructure can be framed as leadership, or it can be framed as scandal. It can look like courage, or it can look like panic. Insiders say Catherine and the Foundation understood that if whispers were already moving inside the building, the only safe move was to step in front of them and force the public to see the change through a controlled lens. That's the emotional beat. Insiders emphasize Catherine choosing visibility over vulnerability. Visibility is risky because it invites criticism. Vulnerability is dangerous because it invites manipulation. And Catherine, insiders say, has learned that in royal life, vulnerability is rarely protected. It is used, so confirming it publicly is Catherine planting her flag before anyone else can plant one on her behalf. It's her saying, "This is not happening to me. This is happening because I decided it must." Insiders suggest the palace feared a leak or a scandal around Foundation governance, not necessarily because something criminal happened, but because governance is where reputations die. Governance is where conflicts over money, priorities, and influence become impossible to explain without admitting that power was being pulled in different directions. If there were internal reviews, if there were emails, if there were decision logs, if there were patterns of delay and filtering, then all it takes is one disgruntled voice to turn that into an explosive story. And once an explosive story forms, it doesn't just hit the Foundation, it hits Catherine's credibility. It hits William's future. It hits the monarchy's image of calm control. That's why insiders say the confirmation reads like a warning shot, not to the public, but to the system. A message aimed inward. You cannot out-leak us now. You cannot out-frame us. You cannot paint this as chaos if we've already told the world it's leadership. The announcement becomes a lock on the narrative door, because once the public has been told complete restructure under Catherine, any alternative leak has to fight that phrase. And fighting the official phrase is hard when the palace machinery is already repeating it. Foreshadow appears instantly in how the public reacts. Insiders predict the reaction won't be clean. Some will admire Catherine's decisiveness. Others will suspect something forced her hand. Because complete restructure sounds like strength, but it also sounds like trouble. People will ask what broke, who resisted, who lost influence. And the palace knows that curiosity is inevitable. That's why preemption matters. You can't stop questions, but you can decide which questions the public starts with. Insiders hint at timing tied to something looming, an upcoming event, an internal report, a stakeholder review, a public-facing initiative that could not survive under the old structure. They suggest the palace didn't confirm this randomly. It was confirmed when it was confirmed because the clock was ticking. Because if something else was about to surface internally or publicly, then confirming first would blunt the impact and redirect attention toward Catherine leading change, instead of Catherine reacting to crisis. And then comes the cliffhanger detail insiders describe as the real accelerant. The confirmation was rushed after someone threatened to leak documents. Not rumors. Documents. That word changes everything, because documents are proof. Documents don't argue. Documents show patterns. They show timelines. They show who approved what and who blocked what. If someone threatened to leak documents, then Catherine's restructure wasn't just about improvement, it was about control of evidence. And if someone threatened to leak documents, then the restructure isn't just about improvement, it's about stopping something from exploding. This is where it stops being about a charity and becomes about the monarchy's future. Because a complete restructure under Catherine isn't just a management decision, it's a power move. It says the next queen won't be managed by the old machine. It says she will build her own system, her own standards, her own gatekeeping. And insiders warn the real shock isn't that Catherine is gaining influence, it's that she's proving she already has it. The long-term impact is bigger than donor lists and project titles. Catherine sets a template for clarity over tradition. That matters because tradition thrives on blurred lines: who decides, who approves, who speaks, who is advised. Catherine's restructure, insiders say, cuts through that blur. It's not just governance, it's a declaration. If you want to lead, you must control the structure around you, or the structure will control you. The emotional beat is heavy because Catherine isn't only protecting a mission, she's protecting her family and her future reputation. She knows how quickly public perception can turn, and she knows how easily private dysfunction can become public blame. So she chooses a harder path now to prevent a worse crisis later. That is what insiders call her private steal, doing the uncomfortable thing before the uncomfortable thing happens to her. Structurally, gatekeepers lose leverage as new governance locks in. And when governance locks, it stays. That is why this feels like a watershed moment. The moral twist is sharp. Stability has been used as a weapon to keep power hidden until Catherine flips stability into transparency. Not soft transparency, not emotional confession, but structural transparency. Clear lines, clear accountability, fewer shadows. Insiders suggest this won't stop with the foundation. Other palace-adjacent institutions may be reviewed next. Because once you prove you can restructure one power center, you prove you can restructure others. And the final cliffhanger is that one more announcement is coming within days, something that will confirm this isn't just internal tidying. It's a reshaping of how influence will be held in the next era. Because what was confirmed 5 minutes ago wasn't a restructure, it was the first crack in an invisible war. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.